Good afternoon, everybody. Uneducated Economist here. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about lumber today. I know how much you guys love the lumber update videos. Typically, I like to do these lumber update videos on Friday or Saturday because I get an email that kind of tells me what's going on throughout the different industries or different regions of the industry, mainly talking about like what's happening in the southern part of the United States, the eastern part, the western part. And it really tells you a lot about what's happening with the mills and the demand for lumber and plywood out there. Now, like I said, typically I wait for Friday or Saturday to do that. But right now, I just feel that there is so much taking place inside of the lumber industry that I just had to come out and talk a little bit about it, just because I feel that the changes are now happening. For months, I've been saying that your time to buy lumber is now. Like if you have a project that's going to be taking place here in the next few weeks or months, and you can store that lumber, I would not hesitate on going out there and buying that lumber as soon as you can. And we had lumber at $350 per thousand. Now to think about lumber being at $1,700 per thousand and now sitting at $350 per thousand, this is it. This is as low as it's going to get. And I try to encourage people out there who have projects in the future to take advantage of these low prices while you can. And I say, because it's only going to take a little bit of time before the mill curtailments, the inventory depletion starts to impact the demand and we start seeing the prices come up. And this is what we're starting to find now. I mean, it was just a few days ago, lumber was trading at $350 per thousand. Today it closes at $420 per thousand. Now, granted, if you go back and you look through the recent histories over the last couple of years, a 70 per thousand move really isn't that impressive. But when you think about coming off a $350 per thousand, that is huge. That is a huge move. And if you had gone back prior to 2018 and we had a 70 per thousand move in lumber, people would have been flipping out back then. Today, it's hardly even noticed. But that is a significant sign. It is showing that the inventory levels have hit their lowest, or at least the inventory level has reached the point in which that the demand now is exceeding the supply. And the prices are going to start going up. Now, here's the thing. We do not have a lot of home building taking place right now. And this is something that you really have to wrap your head around, this part of it. Because if you do not have the home builders building right now, then you do not have the demand for lumber. If you do not have the demand for lumber, then the mill curtailments continue to kick in. And that is going to continue to deplete the inventory. So right now, we are seeing the inventory depleted and the prices start to rise, and we don't see the demand coming from the home builders. Okay, what will end up happening is at some point the home builder demand will pick up and it will zap that inventory. It will be nothing left and the prices will skyrocket. I cannot tell you how far out into the future that's going to be. Now, I know a lot of people are shaking their heads and rolling their eyes and saying, man, you just don't understand that the home builders are not going to be building homes because there's going to be so many homes for sale out there, right? All these like flood of inventory is just going to all of a sudden just overwhelm the housing market. And if you go and you look at some of the articles that are written out there, it really seems to be that when you take on these so-called expert economist opinions and they tell you that there's going to be a housing market crash, it makes it very difficult to try and see the things that are saying, no, it may not happen in the way that they are thinking. Now, the number one thing that I have been like focused in on is where does that inventory come from? Like, let's forget about the interest rates. Let's forget about all the foreclosures and forbearance and all that other stuff that is happening out there. Inventory generally comes from new construction. That's where the inventory level comes from. During the great financial crisis, we had a giant inventory spike. In fact, it was the spike into the highest inventory levels in U.S. history happened during the great financial crisis. Two things were occurring. Number one, the system was loaded with mortgage-backed securities that were toxic. Now, what that means is that people had taken out loans that were never going to pay them. Right? They didn't have the job, the income, the capabilities, whatever. These loans were issued to people who were never going to pay them back. Those were toxic assets that were that had filled up the banking system. That is not occurring today. We do not have that same toxic asset situation happening within the mortgage market. So the inventory level that came when we had a recession because people couldn't make their payments on their houses, that isn't the same situation within the mortgage market today. So that spike that we saw in foreclosures and people just walking away from their homes, we don't have the same buyers who are going to do that type of thing. They may, I'm not saying they're not going to, but we don't have the same type of buyers that are in the market today. The other thing that was taking place back then is we had a huge home build taking place. There was home builders putting up houses everywhere, overbuild taking place. Now I'm going to show you a graph right now that shows us the total U.S. housing inventory. And this is dating back, I mean, it isn't exactly current. I think it goes to about 6 weeks ago. Okay, so it's fairly current. What I want to show you here, right, on this graph, this goes back to 1984. Yeah, it goes back to 1984. Check out that graph of inventory. We are right now sitting at the lowest inventory in history. On this graph, going all the way back to 1982, I think, 84, 82. It's the lowest in history. Okay. Now, right here is the Great Financial Crisis. That little spike, right? Well, it's not little, it's huge. That spike right there was the Great Financial Crisis. If we apply that spike, the amount of inventory increase that happened during the Great Financial Crisis, and we apply it to the point that we are right now today, it takes our inventory level to about 3,000 here on this graph. All right, that's 3,000 or whatever they're trying to call it at. That is, although higher in inventory than just about any time in history, it is not as high as the Great Financial Crisis, right? And what that would mean is we are going from an inventory level from the lowest in history to the highest in history minus the Great Financial Crisis. That's what we were anticipating. So I'm not trying to say that this isn't going to happen, right? I mean, this very well could happen, and there's plenty of people out there who are screaming at the top of their lungs that this is definitely going to take place, that we are going to have this huge spike in homes, taking us from the lowest of inventory in history to the highest in history minus the Great Financial Crisis. And that spike in inventory is going to crash the housing market. This is what a lot of people are saying. Now, I work in the lumber supply industry, right? The building supply industry. I watch all the builders come in and with their blueprints, and I see the customers coming in. We ship out housing packages. We are very much in tune with the new construction market. And I can tell you now, it is not happening. There is some new construction. There are people who are still building homes. There will never be a time in history of the world will there be a time when there's not homes being built. There will always be homes being built at some point. Now, whether it's an overbuild like prior to the Great Financial Crisis that causes a spike like that, that's an entirely different story. That is not what's happening today. If there was mortgage-backed securities in the market like there was back then, I would agree we might have a huge spike. But that's not what's occurring today. Right? If there was a situation in which that the rising of Fed funds was causing the mortgage-backed securities to go up at the same pace, then we might see a flood of foreclosures or the lack of homes being sold. But that's not happening right now. And the flood of foreclosures would really only come from people who were not able to refinance into higher interest rates. And when you think about all the different stuff that they have available nowadays for people to refinance into 40-year loans or, all the crazy schemes that they have for keeping people in their homes. I mean, you think about how hard of a time people would have to be in order to give up their fairly good payment on their house so that they could pay some high rent on an apartment. I mean, times would have to be pretty dang tough in order for that to occur. Not saying it isn't going to happen. I'm just saying that's what it's going to take. And then it would take 2 years of hard times and people going into foreclosures and that would have to start today. In order to see the wave of foreclosures start to come, it would be 2 years down the road from today. So are we seeing foreclosures kicking in? No. The longer we wait, the longer it's going to take before that wave of foreclosures brings the inventory level back up. Again, people trying to tell me that it's a big nothing burger, or that I'm trying to say that it's a big nothing burger. I'm not saying that at all. I am not saying that at all. What I am trying to say is that if you are out there looking for the evidence that there is going to be a housing market crash, you will find it. You will definitely find it. I mean, I personally would love to buy into rental property. I mean, that's kind of what I'm gearing myself up to do. But if the situation doesn't present itself, I'm not going to pretend that it's there. I mean, I'm not going to. So this is the reason why I keep saying to people, keep your eyes open for everything out there. Not just the information that you want to see, look for the information you don't want to see. I mean, take a look at that graph. That's pretty incredible to think about. How far down we are. We're the lowest inventory in history. And even with the spike of the great financial crisis, still wouldn't take us up to just about where we were throughout history. I mean, sure, it would be higher, but not that much higher than the great financial crisis. It didn't exceed that. It won't exceed that. I mean, in comparison, right? I mean, if we have the same spike in inventory as we did back then. So, I'm going to leave these links down in the description for you guys. Uneducated Economist, you let me know.